Welcome to Inside the Outside. So glad you could join us this episode. I'm Christy Kirk.
And I'm Gary Kirk. Since we're in the middle of the eat until you can't eat anymore season, we thought we would talk about cooking outdoors. Just because you're on the trail doesn't mean you have to suffer when the dinner bell rings. I remember when we first started camping, you said that you were afraid we would have to live on ramen noodles.
I was terrified that it was just going to be ramen noodles because when you backpack, you're deep in the woods. You can't carry perishable items, or at least not for longer than a day. And so much of the backpacking stuff I had read talked about heating up ramen noodles. And I'm out of college, so I really didn't want to have to do that again.
Well, I think, that is one of the biggest misconceptions for people just getting started. They think that you're going to have to suffer when it comes to the food and that there's all these sacrifices. And yeah, you're going to have to make some changes, but there's no need to suffer. And I think you learned that really quick, even on our very first trip.
Right. But I think the key is that you really have to plan your food and think ahead and be prepared.
Absolutely. So when I think about cooking outdoors, for me, it comes to 4 different kinds of scenarios. You have your lightweight backpacking, which is where most people are afraid they're going to live on ramen noodles. And then there's this thing that you and I have sort of added to our tradition, which is that packable but perishable kind of food. Usually going to reserve that for the first day of the trip or something, but it's nice to have that little treat on that very first day. Then the others, they're kind of similar. You have this Outback camping where you have some type of a conveyance where that might be a bicycle or maybe a horse or an ATV, motorcycle, something like that. And then you have your car camping, which is what a lot of people are very familiar with, and it's usually sort of that gateway into the outdoors. Let's break it down and talk about some of these different types of scenarios and how you might prepare for that type of cooking outdoors.
Well, I think the key for backpacking is weight. You don't want to carry anything heavy. And one of the things I have a problem doing is that I pack too much food because I have this fear that I'm going to be deep in the woods and I'm going to be ravenous. And what happens is I'm actually less hungry when we're on long backpacking trips than I would normally be.
Yeah.
And so knowing that, I try to pack smart. I don't like a breakfast that I have to heat water up for, so I want something that's granola bar, nuts, something that's dense in calories but grazable. And really, we've got it down to we're only cooking 1 meal per backpack trip. That's often our lunch. Yep. Because we can take a break, we can heat up water, we can make something dehydrated, and they're wonderful dehydrated meals now. And you can also go to your grocery store and find things like instant mashed potatoes and non-perishable packable cheese sauces, tunas, things like that are lightweight that you can just take with you. But we usually do a dehydrated of some sort at that lunch meal and make that the big meal. And then dinner is another grazable.
And just to clarify, dehydrated is definitely an option, but most of what we pack is freeze-dried. And, it comes from things like Mountain House, for instance. They make a stroganoff that we love, macaroni and cheese. They have some breakfast options, scrambled eggs. I like the packable pre-cooked bacon, super light, just pull it out, go to town on it. Starbucks instant coffee for those coffee lovers like myself. There's powdered drink mixes, you name it. There's lots of very lightweight items. And one of the things that I love about all of these is the cleanup and disposal. We typically eat right out of the bag that it's cooked in. So that way we don't have to worry about these kind of things. And then, you can squish this down to practically nothing, stick it in your garbage bag, put it in your pack, and you're done. Very little cleanup. Even if you wanted to boil it in the pot and cook it right there, still very little cleanup. You can wipe that thing out, give it a little rinse, and you're done.
Yeah, I will say that this type of outdoor cooking is the least tasty outdoor cooking.
Yes.
Because these freeze-dried or dehydrated, they're both dried in some fashion. You add water to make them come back to life. There is a limit to how delicious they're going to be. Now, some of the flavors are better than others. I'm always grateful for these meals, so I'm not saying that they're not tasty. But, a freeze-dried or beef stroganoff is not going to be the same as the beef stroganoff you get at home.
Without a doubt.
So know that there's a taste difference. But I think at the end of a long backpacking day or in the middle of a long backpacking day when you need energy to go forward, that's what you need. Something that you can eat that's hot. It gives you energy, and it will never taste better than it does in that moment.
There. Yeah, exactly.
If you buy these meals and make them at home, you're not going to be happy.
No, they're not thrilling at all.
No. So this is the least exciting form of outdoor cooking, but it's essential. There are better choices. It doesn't have to be ramen, and you can be happy at the end of your backpacking day.
Yeah, and that leads me to this packable but perishable scenario. We've sort of made it part of our tradition that on that first day, we take something that you wouldn't typically have way back on the trail, but it's similar to something that you would have at home. Sometimes it's exactly something that you would have at home. Like, for instance, the nachos. The nachos has become one of our go-to, gonna have it every time. It is very comforting to have.
It really is. But you can't have that for day 3 on a backpacking trip because the chips won't survive. So it has to be a day 1. And it's become that sort of day 1 reward because day 1 of a long backpacking trip, day 1 and the last day are the 2 hardest days because you're just starting and you're excited, but you haven't gotten into the rhythm of anything yet. That first day feels much harder as far as, physically walking all those miles. So knowing that there's some kind of salty, delicious reward at the end is really, really nice.
And it is something that you want to keep simple because you are going to be tired, and you don't want to spend an enormous amount of time with all of this. So again, planning is key. You want to make sure that you prep the food. The nachos is super easy because you just open up a cheese pouch and get out the chips and go to town. But we've also done some more elevated meals like steaks on the fire, grilled salmon, fondue. We've made cheesecake on the trail. But all of these require a certain amount of planning and preparation at home. Like the cheesecake, I went ahead and whipped up the cheesecake filling, went ahead and crushed the graham crackers for the crust, and we had everything in Ziploc bags so that when we got there, we could put it together.
And the key in those cases, too, was that we were in parks where you could have fires. So most trail hiking you're going to do, you're not going to have access to fire because they're not allowed.
Yeah, or even if you do, it's going to be very limited to where you can have it. Like along the AT, they have specific places where you can have fires in the shelters, not out on the trails.
Right. And in these instances, we had access to fire. We were at campsites with fire rings. And in those cases, you can really go all out and have some delicious food.
Yeah, and especially, too, like these places where, take, for instance, your very first trip. It was not a distance hike. We hiked in a few miles, set up camp, and stayed there for a couple days, and that gave us a lot of flexibility about what we were doing, and, we could pack a little heavier than we would normally do because we knew we were only going a couple miles and we were going to stop there. And, these items are heavy compared to what you would normally put in a backpacking trip, but you're going to eat them on day 1 typically, and then your pack gets significantly lighter immediately. So these last 2 categories are very similar, but when it comes down to it, you're going to have to make certain considerations when your conveyance is a bicycle or a horse, an ATV, a motorcycle, or something like that. You can carry a whole lot more than you would with backpacking, but you still have a limited amount of space, and weight is a little bit of a concern, not as much as it would be with backpacking. One of my favorite backpacking trips that falls into this camping with a conveyance category or scenario is the annual Cranberry Glades Wilderness Trip that we do in West Virginia. It's been going on since back in the 90s, and back then everybody was going in on foot, but there were so many of us, you could divide things across different packs and you could take in a lot of stuff. It's evolved to the point where now we're using bicycles and even adding trailers to the back of the bicycles, so you can really carry a lot of stuff that you wouldn't normally have on a backpacking trip. So it's very similar to car camping, but because of the type of conveyance, it allows you to go to places that you couldn't get a car to. And that really enhances the experience, but at the same time doesn't sacrifice this flexibility that you have when it comes to making the meals.
And for that trip, we've also pre-made quite a few food items that you take in. There's a beef roast recipe that we love, and I've made that in advance and frozen it. They've hiked in with that. hiking isn't the right word. They've pedaled in with that.
Some of us walk. Not me.
Yeah. Whatever. I've made biscuits that we've frozen and they've taken in. So there's a lot of prepping in advance for this trip, so they can take lots of different food frozen. It can last because they have coolers, and can keep them well fed through the whole trip.
Yeah, I'll tell you, a couple years ago was the first time we had taken the beef roast in there, and a few of the people were a little skeptical. It's like, what? You're going to do beef roast up there? Yeah, but it was already pre-cooked, and all I had to do was heat it up in a pot, and let me tell you what, whipping up some mashed potatoes and macaroni and cheese and then the beef roast, it was absolutely delicious. There was very little cleanup to do because people literally wipe the pot clean of these foods. Absolutely delicious. Those bacon biscuits the next morning, they had bacon and cheese, and all I had to do was wrap them up in a little bit of foil and set them next to the fire to warm them up. Absolutely delicious and super easy to deal with. It's all about that pre-planning and pulling it off. When you get there, super easy. I remember even one trip, Dylan's first backpacking trip ever. It happened for his birthday. He wanted to go to Cranberry for the first time for his birthday. So we took him in there, and I wanted to bake a cake. Now, let me say, I wouldn't call it a cake, and it wasn't really baking, but I managed to pull off this fudgy cake-like thing that we ended up eating with spoons, and let me tell you, that sucker was good. Absolutely delicious. But, as you were alluding to, there's a lot of flexibility. We have the way to be able to divide this weight up. We do take small coolers. It gives us the ability to take different types of cookware and utensils. And we have stoves, like 2-burner Coleman stoves, instead of just a little alcohol burner stove like you would have backpacking. So, it really opens up a lot of options.
And so does car camping. Because in car camping, you can pretty much take anything you want. There are even coolers that'll plug into your car and stay cool. So if you are a novice and want to get out into the woods, but the whole food thing has you worried, as it did me in the beginning, car camping is a great way to start because you can literally take everything with you.
Now, all that being said, you aren't limited to the standard hamburgers and hot dogs that you think of for the 4th of July or something like that. In our last podcast, if you remember, I was on location with Dylan at Morrow Mountain State Park with the Tar Heel State Hangers for their annual Hangsgiving, and it was off the charts, the type of food that we had there. There was one person that cooked a turkey right in the fire. There was pots of green beans and mashed potatoes and stuffing, this huge dinner that was over the top, and every bit of it was cooked right there on site. So, granted, a lot of people pitched in. There was lots of, hands in the kitchen, but it worked out really good. For breakfast, we had biscuits that were cooked in a Dutch oven. We had scrambled eggs and sausage and bacon. Trust me, we ate really, really well, but we were still hanging around a campfire. We were sleeping in our hammocks. It was very much an outdoor experience, but you had those luxuries.
Yeah, I think it really depends on how much energy you want to put into it and how much you want to pack along.
Totally.
If you are going on a trip where moving and hiking is the number one focus of that trip, you're not going to do a whole lot of gourmet cooking.
There's a trade-off and a sacrifice on the food.
Yeah, but there are people who go camping just so they can cook on a campfire, and there are tons of blogs and YouTube videos you can explore to get ideas. And if that's what you love, there's really no limit to your creativity. You can just go to town and have a ball and have some great food.
Yeah, I've always said that food tastes better outdoors. There's just something about sitting out there with this, fresh air, sitting by a campfire and eating. There's just something special about it. I don't know if the food actually tastes better. Call it placebo if you want, but I like eating outdoors.
Well, hopefully this episode has given you some food for thought. Kind of funny here. The next time you hit the trail, give some of these ideas a try. And if you do, let us know. We'd love to see some of your outdoor dishes. Gary would especially love to see them because I prefer to rehydrate. But check us out on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, and we'll see you next time.